Hello, everyone. I'm here now with my friend Aryavan, who's speaking to us from New Delhi. We spoke with his wife Ishani earlier, and so now we're enjoying his company. Full disclosure, Aryavan grew up in the community of Palo Alto where I live. I've known his parents since before he was born, but I've never actually asked him some of the questions I'm about to ask him, so I'll be hearing things that I don't know either. Welcome, Aryavan. Nice to have you here.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Okay, Aryavan, I know you grew up at Ananda, so how did I've often asked people in these series of interviews, when did you come to master? But since you were born into it, talk a little bit about sort of what it was like to grow up in a community now from the perspective of being a disciple. Sort of how did it feel to you? What did you know when you were a child?
A lot of things you take for granted when you're born into something. I think everyone who is born an Episcopalian takes those traditions for granted, and everyone who grows up, just whatever tradition you grow up with seems very natural to you. And so that's just childhood. And it was a little different with us because even from a fairly young age, when I would go out and meet other people outside of the community, there was some sense that something was different. Obviously there's growing up in a path of meditation, even in the progressive 90s, was a pretty outside of the box thing to do. And so occasionally when it would come up, it was, I live in a meditation community, even as I got old enough to understand what that meant. But being in the Bay Area, people either thought it was cool or they didn't think anything of it. I didn't ever have any problems with, thinking it was weird or different or whatever it was, which was nice.
Do you have any childhood memories of being aware of Master's influence in your life? Did you have a spiritual inclination, or were you just a basic kid?
I thought I was pretty basic. I'm a basic kid who read Autobiography of a Yogi at the age of 9.
I see.
And so just your average every day. But I remember feeling, when I read that book, actually, I remember reading it. I read it over a summer just for fun. I don't think even my parents suggested it to me, but it was there. And what's actually even weirder about it is I'm not a voracious reader, and I never have been. But I was a kid and I picked it up, and I just remember there was this warm feeling that I would get when I read that book. And I didn't think a lot of it, but it did keep me reading. And so I think I probably, even though I probably jumped around, I probably finished the book that summer, even as a 9-year-old, cover to cover. And it's interesting, that feeling I still get when I read it today. That book in particular, in a way that other books, I feel nice and I feel inspired, but there's something about the warmth. I remember finding it as funny as a 9-year-old as I do today, which is an incredible thought for one book to be able to entertain both sets of people. Either that or my sense of humor is not evolved.
No, Master's sense of humor is very evolved. So it's
exactly right. It's deep enough to reach both.
I know you also, when I say the community I live in, this is the community in Palo Alto, and we started a school, and you were one of the founding children. So you were 5 years old when you started in our kindergarten here. Is that correct?
That is correct. It was it moved every year for the first few years. Its location, it had to get bigger and bigger as it expanded. And again, it just seemed like a normal thing to have teachers who were, for those people who know, Education for Life is it's a whole different way of holding the child. And so I had teachers who just absolutely, they were amazing, and they loved me, is actually what I put. And so it wasn't until much later that I realized that was a fairly special way of being educated, and also really just touching back on the community. Growing up in a community where you know everybody, there were 100+ people that I lived with, and I knew all of them on a first name basis, even as a child, and they would say hi to me. And all of that felt normal until I realized when I went out that is not how most people live, even in nice parts of town.
So go ahead.
No.
So you, our school at that time went only up to the 8th grade, and you were always the oldest child, or at least one of the oldest children in the school all the way through.
Except for the first year. The first year there was a middle school, which was, and then the demand wasn't there, and they focused on the elementary. So I was the oldest child for almost every year until I became the first graduate.
Did you feel that you were confined and deprived in any way?
Never. I never really did. It's interesting. I think because, and I don't actually think about this a lot, but from a very young age, I was asked to take on more responsibility. Like they had me help with younger children, or not just me, all of us. And I think that kind of engagement made me always feel like I was a little bit of a hybrid between student and, I don't know if teacher is the right word, but like I was like student plus, and I had responsibilities and I had to do them. So I always felt like I was plenty entertained by school in that sense. I found the school interesting. I found what I got to do in terms of like what I would now recognize as leadership interesting, but I didn't really tie it all together until much later, because I was always the oldest, and they always did look to me and to my classmates to some degree to sort of hold the energy, as we would say.
So our school at that time only went to 8th grade. So after 8th grade, you had to go into a completely different environment. How was that transition for you?
I went from a graduating class of 2 to a graduating class of 400. So that was interesting. I was looking back recently at some of the things from high school, and you would think, you can understand where a school would be able to academically prepare a class of 2 very well. There's a lot of attention that can be given there. I was in a larger classroom with more children, but as an 8th grader, there was one other 8th grader. And so you think, okay, they can be prepared in all the traditional academic ways because there's a lot of attention, but what happens when they get to the social? And it was completely the opposite. Socially, I just felt like I had been preparing all of my life for this moment to get thrown into this big pond with all of these different possibilities. And I remember just leaping straight into it in a way that I never thought I would have. Like, I was a shy kid. I was afraid of going up on stage. I was afraid of talking to people for a long time. But by the time I got to 8th grade and then the transition to 9th grade, I ended up high school as the vice president of the school. I was giving speeches in front of 1,500 people. And it was just so natural to me. It's the oddest thing. I wasn't prepared by actually living it. I was prepared by, I'm not even sure, by vibration.
Well, but you have to tell me something. Like, what was it about your upbringing that made you able to just shift environment so radically, but not be thrown by the changed environment?
I think I had different teachers all through the years, but I think that they all had in common, they prepared children, they prepared me, and also I think my parents did this a lot as well, to not look to my environment to signal how I should feel. And that there was an idea that it's even actually built into the school rules, that basically you can choose happiness. You can use your energy or your willpower to direct your energy and to become, basically, to get what you want and to do what you need to do. And so there was there was a moment where I could have definitely looked at this big school and been afraid. And it wasn't like I wasn't nervous, but I had been, I guess, taught to really run towards challenge, to really see challenge as an opportunity for growth, even if I wouldn't have been able to cognize it quite like that at the time. But to run the way I've always described it, and I really feel like my elementary education at Living Wisdom School prepared me, was to run towards the wave. Like, I used to be very afraid of getting into the ocean, getting into the water. It was cold. And at some point, there was just a shift that happened where I would just run in full speed, even screaming if I had to. And that's how I sort of felt like I was trained to approach challenge. Like, this thing is coming. If I run away, it'll still hit me. So I should just run right at it. And yeah, in high school, even looking back, just in terms of the scale and just kind of who I was leaving 8th grade from the outside, not what was going on inside, I never would have predicted who would emerge in high school. but it was exactly who I needed to be.
Fantastic. But at this point, you have read Autobiography of a Yogi, but would you call yourself a disciple at that point?
You know, it's funny. I did call myself that, but I had no concept for what it meant.
I see.
So people would ask me, you know, it would come up, like we were at a Catholic high school, like, what religion are you? I don't know if that's popular, like, conversation among high schoolers, but for some reason it came up a lot. And I had this answer, where I would say, I'm a disciple of Paramhansa Yogananda. And they would say, well, what does that mean? Rightly so. And I would say, well, I'm kind of like a Hindu Christian. And they would, you know, cock their head to one side, but they would leave it at that because, you know, what does that mean? And I had no idea what that meant, but something about it felt right. It felt content, but I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't reading any books. I wasn't integrating anything consciously of Master's teachings into my life, but I considered myself to be a disciple.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that you had that identification so earlier. So you get out of, let's skip ahead a little. You get out of high school, you go to college. And what did you study in college? Exactly what did you study?
I have a bachelor's degree in radio, TV, and film, really? Which is inaccurate because I know nothing about radio, but it was just how they combined everything. But basically film. I really studied film and TV, and I wanted to make movies and television shows or something. I didn't know what. I didn't know what I wanted to be. I had never had like a passion. And so I sort of just fell into something that I liked, but I was still on the lookout for what it was that was really going to light me up. And that wasn't it, as it turned out.
Well, and then after college, you started traveling. What did you do as soon as you were out of college?
College was it's a kind of depressing experience for me, actually, because it was the first time in my life that I had met so many people who were, and again, forgive me, but so shallow. I mean, the just no interest in anything higher. If I had stayed, I think, in the Bay Area, there's just enough of a vibration of, you know, I don't know how it is now, actually. I haven't lived there for some time, but there was a sort of understanding that materialism wouldn't get you happiness. There was not a, you know, getting what you want will equal joy. But when I went to college, I went to the school in a very materialistic part of the state in Southern California in Orange County. And I mean, it's very wealthy, it's very well to do, and that's all fine. But it was also a commuter school. So everyone was local and everyone was there because they kind of wanted to go to college, but they didn't really care. They didn't really want to do something. And so as a result, I met my first mass group of people whose values were just completely different than my own. And I hadn't even realized that I had values up to this point. And so when that happened, I started, and environment is stronger than willpower. So I just saw my consciousness and my will and my happiness slowly kind of degrade. And I got to the point at the end of college where I sort of didn't see the path forward. I was a little bit confused. And before my last year of college, I went and saw Swami speak at Spiritual Renewal Week. And even that was a small miracle, because to this day, I don't know why I went. I just got this strong idea at the end of summer before my senior year of college. I'm going to go to SRW. I left work early. I had submitted my resignation for my summer job a few days early. I drove up there and I saw Swamiji speak, and he said, the youth should go to India. And that, like a lightning bolt. And I can't, again, explain why, but it just completely integrated into my cells. And I knew I had to go. And so I went back to college. I forgot all about this part of it, but I remembered I have to go to India. And so I was blessed to have my parents offered to, as a gift for graduation, they had all these frequent flyer miles. They'd go anywhere in the world you want. And so I went to Europe and I went to India because I still had this thought of India. By this point, I wasn't connected to spirituality, but I had to go. So long story short, I go all the way through Europe on a Ural pass. I'm having all of this fun. But at the same time, I'm getting more and more depressed. On one hand, that trip through Europe was one of the most fun things I had done to that point in my life. But it was completely empty. And it was like this stark contrast was handed to me about how, well, not little, how nothing of a connection there is between the pleasures of the world and your ongoing level of happiness. That you can achieve a peak of something like happiness through these things, but that it just goes back down as soon as that thing is gone. And I knew it on some level, but this really like hammered it into my head. And I remember I was actually on a bench in Budapest on an island in the middle of the river. And I was like, I'm in one of the coolest places I've ever been. I'm meeting so many cool people, and I've never been less happy. And I had this thought. And at the same time, I had been reading Swamiji's book, The Path. The old, I didn't call it the old path, but the old version, because my dad had, in his infinite wisdom, given me a copy right before I left, which was just brilliant, because looking at me, I wouldn't have thought he's going to read this book, but he saw something I didn't. And I was reading it, and I read Swamiji have the exact same experience in the South Carolina, walking on the beach. He just like, what does all this mean? And he basically comes up with the realization that God must be consciousness, and everything in his life basically changes from this moment. I didn't have the realization. I only realized I wasn't happy, but for me that was enough, because a few days later, my trip brought me to India, and I landed at Ananda. And from there on, I mean, everything changed.
Well, Swami Kriyananda, you know, when Swami Kriyananda said the youth should go to India, I think he was talking about the young people of Ananda, just to clarify that, but meaning that Ananda's work in India is a work for young people because it's unformed, and it requires the kind of excited energy and also the long-term commitment that young people can give it, and also the thinking out of the box, because it needs to be new. So, okay, so now you've actually listened to Swami inadvertently, and you land, where exactly did you land? Swamiji was living there, so you ended up where he was?
Oh, very soon after. He wasn't in India when I landed, so I landed in Pune, where he was living, but hadn't come back yet. And I was with Nayaswami Jaya. I was staying with Tim and Lisa Clark, and we were just in this set of flats. And every day they were basically going out to work on this new land they were developing to become a new community, an ashram. And it was amazing. I was just going out there. I went the first day, and actually, as it turned out, I got very sick and had to spend the next week in bed. I think my thought is that I caught swine flu in Paris. This was going around at the time. They were making everyone fill out. In this age of pandemic, it's interesting to think about. Fill out all these forms saying, were you in this country that has swine flu? Do you have these symptoms? And I'm checking, yes. And I'm thinking, for sure, they're going to quarantine me. And when I get in, they say, you're fine. The gentleman, the doctor at the border, at the airport, literally holds my wrist like this for 10 seconds and says, you're fine, which is a miracle unto itself. And I think it was a blessing in disguise. But I land basically in Pune, and I go out for a week. And this is only important because after I woke up from that forced hibernation, I felt like something was different. And my plan was only to stay with them, with Ananda there, because I was always friendly with Ananda. I never rejected it. I just hadn't really made it my own in a real way. It just was sort of there. And so my thought was, I'll stay with them until I get my feet on the ground, and then I'll go travel. But when I came out of that illness, something was different. And I was meeting these monks, and they were all my age, and they were super dynamic. And Shurja was there, and Jamal, and all these great guys. And it was just so magnetic. And a thought came to me, maybe there was something, like the last time I was truly happy was when I was a child, like when I was just like joyful in a natural way. Maybe instead of that being just a nature of childhood, and adulthood is just you're supposed to be depressed, maybe there was something going on around me that was causing that. And maybe that was Ananda. So let's try.
Very, very good. So when did Swami come back?
A couple months later, I actually extended my trip. I was only supposed to be there 2 months, but I was going to miss him. And by the time I started just meditating a little and going to kirtan, everything was opening up inside of my heart was just opening. I was like, I have to meet Swamiji now. I can't just leave. And so I changed my whole thing. And Shurjo and I took a motorcycle from Pune 1,000 miles up to Delhi to see him when he landed.
So you were double on a motorcycle through India. I remember that. I remember that because your father was asking for protective prayers for his crazy son during that whole period of time while you're on a double motorcycle riding through India. Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of a less logically good idea than that. Neither of us had ever ridden a motorcycle before. Neither of us knew how. We learned for this trip. But it's funny. It's like one of those things. I started getting these intuitive flashes and I just sort of thought, okay, this is a different kind of idea. I haven't had ideas come like this where it's just like there. I'm going to follow this and see what happens. And I looked at a map of India and I said, I'm going to ride a motorcycle up to Delhi. And it was really one of the most important experiences of my life up to that point, because I did not know that I was capable of anything before that. I didn't realize that if I just pointed my will, focused in one direction, that I could really do anything. I knew I could do a lot, but that was when the barrier between like possible and impossible just kind of melted away, because it was not possible. Adding on to the whole thing, and this is something that I didn't tell my dad at the time because he was worried, naturally so, but I actually had a very minor motorcycle accident right before we left, and I sprained my ankle a few days before we were supposed to go. But everything conspired to make it happen, and it was a beautiful trip. And really, I mean, from that moment, I think that my life became something that I really felt like was my own. And it was like, okay, now I can actually decide what to do.
And so at the end of this, after your fever and after your motorcycle ride, then you present yourself to Swami Kriyananda in Delhi. So what happened when you met Swami? I mean, you
so the first time
childhood, but this is completely different. This is you as an adult walking in on your own.
Exactly. I mean, I have little pictures and moments from childhood of Swamiji. He came to a couple of our plays, I think. He came to Buddha and he came to Jesus. And I remember, I could feel the electricity.
Yeah, you said Swami just came to Jesus. No. Swami came to the performance of the life of Jesus. And then I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go on.
Well, no, but I mean, he also did, but in addition to the other masters. But that's, yeah. So I arrived in Delhi, and basically it was, at some point became known that I had a film degree, even though I had not a lot of intent in using it. And somehow I got just sort of dropped into this meeting with Swamiji and these two television executives that had come wanting to meet with him about doing a show on their channel. Mm-hmm. And it was, these two heads of a studio and Swamiji, and then I was there. And one of these things is not like the other. But I just got to be in this meeting, and because I knew video. And I don't remember a lot from the meeting. I don't remember even if that transpired and that meeting was fruitful. But I remember at one point he looked at me. I mean, he was talking to them ostensibly, but he was looking right at me. And he said, "If you can't speak simply, you don't know what you're talking about." Huh. And I just loved that. It was just completely, because I had always felt inferior because I didn't have this very intellectual, inferior is not right, but I didn't have this intellectual way of relating to the world. And so when going through college and seeing all these people talk with their like this put on thing, I began to wonder, wait, does that mean that I'm not actually capable of the same? And somehow Swamiji just picked up on that and weaved it into his conversation, but also gave it straight to me. And honestly, I can't remember anything else that was said that day, but I left that meeting high. I was uplifted on a level that I hadn't ever been before. I felt so good for no tangible reason. And I knew I had to stay around him. I had to make that a priority in my life, is to somehow feel that way more and figure out why being around someone can make you feel that way.
So I know he invited you then to run his camera, basically. Is that sort of what happened after that?
Yeah. He, Dave was supposed to come over and record these programs, and at the last minute he couldn't. And because I was at this meeting and because I have a film degree, I keep putting it in quotes because I'd never felt equal to the job he was asking me to do. But he asked me to do it. And so from then on, I mean, really for more or less for the next 3.5 years, I went where he went just in case he would do something that I could record. Because, I mean, just as you record the things that you do so that, you know, the number of people in the room is always dwarfed by the number of people who will be able to be touched by it later on the internet, I would record his talks, I'd record his TV shows, I'd record anything he would let me record. I would record in between moments sometimes because I was there and I had a camera, and I knew that someday, even now, but in the future, the ability to see, we just don't have that kind of access to saints today, and seeing what they were really like. I mean, we have an incredible treasure trove of master, but even so, it's really like a few films and some audio recordings, and, you know, but now we have all of these hours and days of recordings of Swamiji, but also seeing his entire, like the spectrum of the way that he presented himself, the way that he presented his vibration and modulated it for what the people needed at that time. And the vibration that he brought out at the end was so perfect for me. I incarnated so much later than him for a reason, because only that expression of just total sweetness and love and kindness, and just, I mean, he literally would hug me with his aura. I could feel it. I could feel Swamiji never tried to teach me anything directly. He never tried to correct me because he knew I was too fragile. All he did was love me because he knew that was what was going to bring me to the next step. And now I'm ready for the world to correct me. But he knew that's what I needed. And I watched him correct others when they needed it in a kind and loving way. But sometimes he would say, "You're doing this wrong." But he would never do that with me because he knew.
That's so beautiful. So then Swami passed away in 2013. And I mean, this is obviously, we could go on for a very, very long time with this, but I'm going to just kind of like skip some of the middles. So, because I would like people to know sort of where you are and what you're doing now. So I know eventually you met your lovely wife, Ishani, and then you also got back into Living Wisdom School, correct? So where were you teaching? What were you doing there?
So at the very end of Swamiji's life, he started telling many people, I think yourself included actually, but many people around, and myself included, that he saw me as a school teacher. He saw me as being in schools, and he made it very clear. And so when he left the body, it seemed very logical that I would try to teach in a school. And luckily at that moment, the Living Wisdom School in Ananda village was looking for a teacher, and Kamran heard, who was the director of the high school there, heard that Swamiji had said this to me, and any teacher would see that as a sign of, at least let's try to see if there's anything here. And he offered me a job. He wanted me basically to teach there. And so I just jumped right in soon after, actually. I had a few things left to sort of finish, a few responsibilities left, but within less than a year of when he left the body, I was teaching in an EFL school.
And you enjoyed it? You felt it was right for you?
I mean, I've never done anything. I mean, you want to talk about running at the wave. I've never done anything that was remotely as challenging as teaching, and in some ways as teaching at an EFL school. Now, I hope the people that I'm about to train in EFL teacher training don't hear this, because it is, there are layers to it. But it, like, when you put your whole heart into something, it matches, the challenge matches the energy. And so even as I run faster at the wave increases in intensity because it gauges my energy and it says, okay, you can handle this. And so it was an incredible experience, an incredible training. But to say that I loved it would be an understatement. I adored it. It was so dynamic and fun, and every day was different. I mean, that was the thing. I didn't know if I could ever go to a job where I just did 9 to 5, 5 days a week, especially after working with Swamiji, where every day was different, every day was dynamic. How am I going to go and just do something where I have the same thing every day? And teaching very much filled that, it scratches that itch, because every day the kids are different. Every day the material is different. The changes that we can't even understand are happening. And so it makes this amazing place to be able to help children, to help students, these amazing kids, but also have them help you. And it's a bit of it's almost like become a cliche that we learn as much from the kids as they learn from us, but I can add my testimony to those before me. It's absolutely true. I signed on for an accelerated growth program, and it was called Teaching at an EFL School.
And so now you find yourself in New Delhi. How did you get from Ananda village to New Delhi?
I mean, basically, I had an inspiration. So I felt a shift inside that something different was going to be asked of me. And Ishani, my wife, luckily felt the same shift at the same time, which also sort of reinforced for each of us that this might be a real thing that we're supposed to follow. And that shift was to leave. And we didn't know exactly where. So we spent some time traveling around Ananda, being of service. We did do video, and we were able to serve in a lot of ways, but really trying to find out, where is this inner call pulling us? Because we got the call, but we didn't get the direction. And when we came to India, we felt it. And again, these things are a little intangible, a little bit difficult to define, but when you feel it, you know. I mean, everyone on the path and not on the path, sometimes we get this is the thing to do. And so shortly after we made this decision, and this inspiration really was tied to EFL, I feel like education will be a part of my dharma for a long time, at least a major part of it. And so I had the thought, okay, if I'm coming to India, I want to do EFL, I can try to bring EFL into the mainstream system, because the schools here, especially the lower tier schools, the schools that don't have as much financial backing, could really benefit from EFL, because the principles of the system don't require money. They just require energy. And so that was very inspiring to me. And so we came with that thought. A couple months later, another devotee who is involved with this large nonprofit wing of a corporation here that actually runs schools had a very similar inspiration, or maybe it was even before, and started this process of wanting to bring education for life in a really concrete way into the schools that they support. So what in my mind was going to be year 5 of the 20-year plan of the next steps for EFL is suddenly year 0. And so now, as I sit in Delhi, we're going to begin teacher training on Zoom, because we're still in the era of COVID, but for whole groups of teachers at entire schools, to try to see if we can take a school it's a fine school, but any school can go deeper. Right. Any school, and especially when you think about like the kind of inner depth that can come from really teaching the whole child, and also the joy that comes for the teacher. It's one of the things I'm most looking forward to. Is education for life is so fun that I think once teachers get a taste for it, they're just going to want more, because it makes class fun. It makes the whole process fun again.
It's very interesting to me when I think about it, having watched your whole life. I mean, I wouldn't have had to watch it. I just heard you here. You were the founding child for, I mean, there aren't that many education for life schools in the world. There aren't that many living wisdom schools in the world. So the one we have in Palo Alto is significant. It was actually, it had been the first one outside Ananda Village, and you were a founding child of that school. So it's like, even though you didn't know it, at the age of 5, you're starting on a trajectory that is proven to be, well, you know, and you read autobiography at 9. It's like our lives are in the hands of God. I don't know why we ever worry. Why do we ever worry about anything?
I know. We have an amazing ability to completely ignore the plethora of evidence around us. We're surrounded by God in no uncertain terms telling us he's there and he's interested in our lives and he's pulling the strings to make them work. And yet, when I look back at my life, at the time it felt like utter chaos, and now it feels like poetry.
It's
like every line rhymes with the last.
That's absolutely fantastic. Well, we could talk for much longer, but I think this is a good introduction, Aryavan. I really appreciate your sharing, and God bless you, and best wishes with all the wonderful work that you're doing. Okay, my friend.
Thank you. It was always a joy, as always, to be with you.